Hi everybody, I'm Jacob Coakley, editor of Stage Directions magazine, and have I got a video editor's note for you this month. So last month in my video editor's note, I ranted about taking photos after show, before noting that it was probably there to make sure that people didn't take photos of sets and then immediately copy them for another production someplace else. And in one of those instances of the universe having impeccable timing, just that thing happened this month when the internet exploded over the fact that TheatreWorks New Milford had mounted a production of Bell, Book, and Candle that appeared to very, very, very closely replicate the look of a show a production of that show that had taken place in previous years at the Long Wharf and Hartford stages. The uproar over the design copying caused TheatreWorks New Milford to cancel productions of the show before redesigning the show, issuing an apology to the Long Wharf and the Hartford stage and the original design team and director, and for the director of the show at TheatreWorks New Milford to resign from his seat on the board of TheatreWorks New Milford after issuing his own apology to the original design team and director. Now, before I go any further, I need to stop and clarify some things I said last month about stealing designs. In my video endnote last month, I said, but at a certain point this has to stop, or we'll have to invent completely new gel colors because all the ones we've used so far have graced the stage and Lord knows you can't use them in another design. This reductio ad absurdum moment implies that I think that design is fungible. That design is design, and any work is equivalent to any other work, and none of it should have any kind of copyrights or protections, because otherwise we'd never be able to create new shows. This isn't true. I value designers and their work, and I think it needs to be recognized, compensated, and protected. Because, while I think that copyright maximalism is not the way to go, it's also not right to go around stealing other people's work. But it's not always easy to draw the line between what constitutes stealing someone's work and what doesn't, and that can lead to some problems. One of the blog posts that covered the Bell, Book, and Candle incident came from Howard Sherman. Now, Sherman is a writer, an advocate for the arts. He's also the director of the Arts Integrity Initiative at the New School for Drama, which focuses on creative and academic freedom in the arts. He is concurrently the senior strategy director of the Alliance for the Inclusion in the Arts in New York, and he was director of the American Theater Wing from 2003 to 2011. He knows whereof he speaks, in short. And one of the things he wrote on his blog about all of this was this: "It is incumbent upon directors to produce a script according to the approved version by the playwright, yet it is also incumbent upon them to create their production anew, through their own conception, their cast and their design, to name but a few key elements. Now, to be fair, there's a blurry line when it comes to iconic shows, often musicals. Productions of a chorus line rarely stray from the original, particularly Théonie V. Aldridge's costumes. And as an avowed Sweeney Todd fan, every production I saw for years was in some way an homage to the Hal Prince-directed original and to Eugene Lee's scenic design, until John Doyle broke the mold with his Watermill production that eventually came to Broadway." End quote. This was interesting to me because it speaks about the gray area in all art about what is truly original, and, for that matter, in theater, about how sometimes a technical element, whether it's scenery or costumes, can become so embedded in the idea of what a show is that it almost needs to be replicated for an audience to feel as if they have actually seen a production of that show. So I called him up and spoke to him about this whole fracas.
Well, that's a good word. I've heard a lot of fracas is good.
I'm glad you like it. At what point does a design become allowable to kind of like do an homage or rarely stray far from the original? And how is that okay, and where are the lines blurred for something like that versus something like this with Bell, Book, and Candle?
Well, let me first say that some people have criticized me for that portion of my essay.
Right.
But let me also say that homage does not mean duplicate.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the phrase that I used regarding chorus line?
Rarely stray far, yeah.
Far. But they are not necessarily exact. I mean, rehearsal clothing has a certain similarity. If you do the show in the period in which it was written, rather than treating it as something that's taking place today, certainly you're going to see similarity. Now, if somebody goes so far as to find the same sweaters, the same leggings, the same colors, et cetera, then you're talking about a duplication. The question is, exactly at what point does it cross from being this is what people would wear in an audition situation in the mid-'70s to this is Theone Aldridge's design? I don't think there is an absolute line unless someone does the perfect replication, which of course they shouldn't, but at what point have they substantially reproduced the show? Every production should start with a blank piece of paper. It may be a piece of paper that first the director scribbles on and says to the designer, I'm thinking about stuff like this. It may be the designer who's got the blank piece of paper. But as soon as you're going into a production with the idea of, okay, we're going to use this, and this from a production or productions that you've seen, then it's about just trying to get it up instead of creating. Now, again, there's going to be a real difference between what's happening, in a junior high school or high school than what's happening, in a professional situation. But the goal should always be to create, not to simply replicate.
This is interesting to me because Sherman has been sharply critical in the past of shows that take the same blank page approach to, well, the page. In a recent blog post, he excoriated a director who deleted scenes from a production of Rent. So I asked him, doesn't this seem like a conflicting message? How come on the one hand we demand originality when it comes to scenic design or costumes, but on the other hand we demand that you stay completely faithful to a script? Doesn't this seem like a conflicting message?
I think you've set it up for me a little falsely.
Okay.
Only in the sense that it is possible to be original without completely reinventing. But there is a difference between a duplicate and simply going through a design process that arrives at solutions that are correct for the play and the period. As to authorial intent, remember that I have said, and I've said this God knows in more than one blog, if you want to make a change to a play that is still under copyright, the point is to ask permission. And this is true whether it's an amateur production or professional production. Certainly, the current Broadway production of A View from the Bridge does not physically replicate any of the indications in Arthur Miller's script about what the set would look like. In this case, while Arthur Miller has passed away, as far as I know, his daughter is the executor of his estate, and that show is not being produced now in a third venue because it started at the Young Vic and it went to the West End and now it's here. Permission's been given because, interestingly enough, it still focuses on the essentials of the text. It's not trying to tell a different story using that text. It is visually making different choices in order to try to get at the text in a different way, and because the rights holder has given permission for it to do so, Ivo van Hove can do it.
As a playwright, of course, I love his respect for authorial intent, about how you shouldn't change the text, but use visuals to try and get to the heart of what a story is. Plus, his comment that it's possible to be original without completely reinventing something is a perspective I'm going to remember. Of course, if you remember, this whole odyssey for me started when I was chastised for taking a photograph in a theater. So I asked him what his thoughts of photography in theater were. In his view, the issue has become a lot more complicated by technology, which has completely changed the dynamics of access to media about a show.
Because Now you can go to Google Images and find all kinds of pictures of all kinds of shows. And as you know, so and then you add the video element, which then now allows people to not only look at design, but they can also look at staging and choreography because of things that may have been captured and put out, you know, on YouTube or Vimeo or what have you. But there have been problems in the past regarding the duplication of productions with people going and looking at archival records at the library at Lincoln Center. Again, what's happened is everything has become more accessible. Are we denying our audience, who we want to see shows, the pleasure of, in some way, recording the experience the way they're used to recording an awful lot of other things? By the same token, if they're taking photographs before and after the show, at what point do they start taking photographs during the show?
Yes.
Which is problematic
Absolutely.
and disruptive, and, you know, and so on. And at what point do they stop pressing photo and switch over to video and literally capture the experience? I think it's all a product of changing technology, of coming to terms with what the technology means. But, and this goes back to a piece that I know you said you read, is what is being taught, what is being explained to aspiring artists, working artists, casual theater goers, so that people can understand where rights remain and where perhaps in this day and age there may be some things that don't need to be held quite so closely anymore. There's legal implications, there's ethical implications here, and they're not necessarily in sync, and it's going to take time to work them out. But fundamentally, if we're talking about art, it really should focus, yes, on the idea of what is the play about, what is essential in the author's mind, and you know, honoring that which is important because that's the right of that artist. By the same token, when a designer and a director create a look, a scene, an idea, that it shouldn't just be considered free for all for the taking, because it shortchanges those artists, and frankly, it shortchanges the people who are going to see that new production because they're not getting a show that has been fully thought through and fully created for them.
For me, that's a great takeaway message, that ultimately stealing is a disservice to your audience. Thank you, Howard, for taking the time to talk with me about all of this. You can follow Howard online on Twitter at HESherman and his blog at www.hesherman.com. I highly recommend doing both. I'll have more on this in the months to come because I have been doing some fascinating research on all of this, about copyright for scenic designers and more, including this PDF of a 1957 document from UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, where they were debating whether or not there should be international copyright for what they called theater decorators. I'm not kidding, I love that term, theater decorators. And they decided, if I'm reading this correctly, they decided that there should be copyright protection for theatrical decorators, assuming two things: that the works were of artistic character and had sufficient originality. Tell me how you exhibit artistic character and sufficient originality in the comments, and I'll see you next month.